guys, welcome back to Dimitra's Dishes. So today we're going to be making a dessert that's really popular in Greece, and it's called Ravani. Ravani is basically a semolina cake that you can flavor with your favorite flavors. I'm going to use orange and almonds today because I love the way those two go together. After the Ravani cake is cooked, it's soaked in a honey syrup, which is also really common with a lot of Greek desserts. A lot of Greek desserts are called syropiasta, which means like they're syrupy. They're soaked in honey syrup. It's very easy to make and it's really elegant and nice, so make it for your next get-together. Let me take you over the ingredients and then we'll get started right away. So we need semolina flour, regular all-purpose flour, a little bit of salt, and some baking powder. And we're going to sift these all together because you always want to sift your dry ingredients. And then we need some sugar for the cake, a little tiny bit of olive oil, the zest of an orange, some sliced almonds, a little bit of vanilla extract, and 4 whole eggs. And we're going to bake it in a 9-inch round baking pan that I've already buttered up. You can brush olive oil on it, you can butter it up. Since I'm using olive oil, I actually brush it with olive oil, and I just put a piece of parchment paper on the bottom so that way it can, release easily. And then of course there's going to be a syrup. In the syrup we're going to use the juice of this orange, some water, Greek honey, and some sugar. That's it. So if you can't find Greek honey, use whatever local honey that you have. Greek honey is the best. It's actually my favorite honey. It has hints of thyme and oregano in it because thyme and oregano grow wild. It's really thick, it's like caramel. So if you can get some and try it. It's so delicious. Okay, so I'm going to begin by sifting my dry ingredients, my flours and my salt. And that's important when you're baking because, sometimes there are little pieces of stone or whatever that you don't want in. You see all these hard pieces that were in my semolina and my flour? You don't want hard bits of anything in cake. You want your cake to be light and airy and fluffy. And the only crunchy thing you want in there is nuts. That's it. Okay. So now I have my tabletop mixer. You can definitely do this with a hand mixer, with a regular hand mixer, but this whips up faster. The Ravani cake is very similar. It's kind of like a sponge cake. There's not a lot of fat in it, so you need to whip it up and whip up a lot of air in it. So you want to put your whisk attachment on there. And like I said, you could definitely do this with a hand mixer, but if you do have a tabletop mixer, it's just going to whip up much faster. So I'm going to whip my eggs and my sugar, maybe for like 3 to 4 minutes until they're thick and fluffy and they're going to form ribbons, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. We always start off on a low speed and then we move up to a higher speed. Okay, so if you see how thick and creamy, this is just the eggs and the sugar. They've whisked in this on high speed for about 2 to 3 minutes. If you're using a hand blender, it's just going to take a little bit longer, maybe double the time, but it'll definitely do the same thing. And it's ready when it falls back and it forms like this, like ribbons, and it's nice and thick. So at this point, I'm going to add my olive oil and my vanilla extract. And I'll also put my orange zest in, and I'm going to use the zest of a whole entire orange. So the zest is going to go in the cake, and the syrup is going to contain all of the juice. And you always want to zest first before you juice. Otherwise, if you juice first, you cannot ever get the zest off. Just going to give this a little whisk. And then we're going to, let me turn this off, and then we're going to slowly add the flour. And that's it. You never want to overmix flour. Once it's all incorporated, it's ready to go. And now we're going to put it in our pan, and I'll show you the next step. Okay, so before we put our cake batter in our pan, I'm just going to spread the almonds right at the bottom of my baking pan. And after it's done, we're just going to turn it upside down. The bottom is going to be the top, and it's just going to look so pretty. It's going to be crunchy because, you know, sponge cakes like this are very, very light. And so you need a little bit of crunch. You know, I like to have lots of different textures going on. Okay, so now we're just going to pour our cake batter right over the almonds. And it smells so good. That orange zest really, really adds a lot of beautiful flavor and such a delightful scent. That's it. We have all of our batter in here. Just going to spread it out. And the oven is preheated to 350 degrees. We're just going to bake it for about 20 to 25 minutes. It's going to start to detach from around the sides once it's ready. And when you put a toothpick in to check it, there shouldn't be any batter in. It should just be like crumbs and should be nice and perfectly cooked. This is a really forgiving cake. If you actually cook it a little too much and maybe it's your first time baking and you take it out a little bit too late, it's so forgiving because you're going to put the syrup on there and it's going to be perfect. So I'm going to pop this in my oven. I'm going to check it at 25 minutes. If it's began detaching from the side, I'm going to stick in the toothpick and see if it's ready, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so while the cake is baking, we're going to make our syrup. So I'm just going to put the sugar and the water in the saucepan right here. The best way to get the honey out of your measuring cup without losing a lot of it is to use a measuring cup that had olive oil in it before. So I had the olive oil, the few tablespoons of olive oil for my cake in here, and it's going to help the honey detach. If you haven't used olive oil in a recipe and you're going to need to get honey, just brush some olive oil in your cup and the honey will come out really, really easily. See that? It's all out. No wastage. Cool trick, right? Okay, so the last part of this recipe is the orange juice. So I'm just going to slice it. So you just need the juice of this whole orange. Because you have the orange zest in the cake, and now you're going to have the orange juice in the syrup, and you're going to get a nice, flavorful cake. Okay, then after it's done, I'm going to let it cool so it can be ready to pour over my cake when it comes out of the oven. All right, so my cake baked for about 22 to 23 minutes, and then when you put in a toothpick, it comes out completely clean. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my knife all around the sides of the cake so that way it's easy to detach when we're going to invert it onto our cake platter. Just like that. I'm going to let it cool for about 5 minutes before I do that. My syrup is also completely ready. Let me show you what it looks like. It's thickened ever so slightly. And if you could smell the aroma in the kitchen, it smells so good. You could even smell like the aromatic honey with the orange. It just smells really, really delicious. So I'm going to wait 5 minutes for this to cool, and then we're going to plate it on here and begin pouring the syrup on it. So my cake has cooled for about 5 minutes. Now we're going to invert it onto this platter. And you want to make sure whatever you're using, you could use a big dish or a platter. It has edges that come up that'll hold the syrup in. We're going to pour a lot of syrup over this, and it's going to pool around the cake just for a little while before it begins to absorb. So you want to make sure it doesn't drip all over your counter and create a mess. Look at how gorgeous this looks. Look at that. That already is so beautiful as it is. Now I'm just going to, actually I won't do this with a knife, I'm going to do this with a toothpick. So now you just take the toothpick and you prick it all around. And sponge cakes like this cool really, really quickly. They don't take that long to cook. They're not dense, they're very light. So they cool down very quickly. And just like any other syrupy dessert that you make in your Greek, with your Greek recipes, you want to make sure that the cake is cool and the syrup is warm, or vice versa. Cool syrup, warm cake. You don't want to put warm, warm or cold, cold. It'll make it won't be really, really good. I'm just going to warm my syrup up just a little bit more, even though it's still pretty hot. And then we're going to begin ladling it over the top of the cake. All right, so we're going to take a ladleful at a time and slowly just go all around the cake, concentrating especially on the edges, because the edges tend to be a little more dry, right? And you're going to keep doing this until it absorbs the syrup, until all of the syrup is poured over this cake. You don't want to pour all the syrup at once though. You want to do this slowly so that way it absorbs from the top and goes all the way down to the bottom. Otherwise, you'll have a dry top and then you'll have a really soggy bottom, and that's not the point of this cake. So each time you pour a ladleful, you wait for it to absorb, and then you go ahead and you keep going until all your syrup has absorbed. All right, so we've poured all of the syrup around the cake, and as it pools all around the platter, and that's okay. It's going to end up absorbing. As the longer it sits, the more the cake is going to suck up all of that syrup, and it's going to get into the cake and be nice and moist. I whipped up some whipped cream. You can get this recipe on my blog or on our YouTube channel. We've put up an episode of how to make your own homemade whipped cream, and you should definitely check it out. So I'm just going to pipe some rosettes on top of this. And you do that by just squeezing the whipped cream out and moving it in a circular fashion, and then lifting up at the end, just like that. You don't have to serve this with whipped cream. You can serve it with a nice scoop of vanilla ice cream or your favorite flavor of ice cream. Let me fill in all of these right there. And that's it. You could even decorate it with some almond slices on top, but it looks perfect for me. I'm going to let it absorb all the rest of the syrup, then I'm going to serve it. I have some guests coming in a little while with a nice cup of coffee or tea. Get the recipe on my website, www.dimitrasdishes.com. Make this, and I'd love to hear how it came out, how you liked it, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.